Welcome to Empathy Stories, where every tale touches the heart and leaves you with profound life lessons. Today, we delve into an emotional journey of love, regret, and second chances, a story about James and Emily, two lives once entwined, now reconnected through resilience and a shared hope for the future. The soft hum of conversation filled the air at Silverwood, the most exclusive restaurant in the heart of Manhattan. Beneath a canopy of twinkling lights and a skyline framed by floor-to-ceiling windows, James Parker exuded the confidence of a man who had built his empire from the ground up. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he radiated the quiet assurance of someone used to being at the pinnacle of success. Across the table, Rachel, his current girlfriend, mirrored the evening's elegance. Her sequin dress catching the golden glow of candlelight as she discussed their upcoming vacation to the Hamptons. James nodded absent-mindedly, his thoughts partially absorbed in the celebration of a major product launch that had cemented his company's dominance in the tech world. The night was meant to be a reminder of everything he had accomplished and all that lay ahead. Yet, as he glanced over Rachel's shoulder, his attention froze. She was there, Emily, his ex-wife, the woman he once envisioned a lifetime with, now stood across the room. Her uniform, a simple black blouse and apron, was a stark contrast to the glamorous guests she served. But it wasn't just her presence that sent a shock through his system. It was the unmistakable curve of her pregnant belly. James's mind churned as he struggled to process the sight before him. Emily, the woman who had once been at his side during his early struggles, looked tired but carried herself with the quiet dignity he had always admired. In her weary eyes, he glimpsed traces of the fire that had captivated him years ago. Memories flooded his mind, her laughter echoing in their modest apartment. The late-night brainstorming sessions when they dreamt of a future filled with possibilities, and the arguments that eventually tore them apart. Rachel's voice broke through the fog. "James, are you even listening?" she asked, her tone light but tinged with irritation. "You've been staring off into space since we sat down." James forced a smile. "Sorry," he replied, his voice tight. "Just thinking about work." Rachel sighed, brushing it off with a shrug, but her eyes lingered on him, suspicious. James shifted in his seat, acutely aware of Emily's presence and the unease growing in his chest. When Emily approached their table, her movements were deliberate and poised, though her face betrayed none of the emotion James felt surging within him. "Good evening," she said evenly, her voice carrying the professionalism expected of her role. "Can I get you started with some drinks?" Rachel barely looked up from the menu. "A glass of your finest Chardonnay." "Please," she chirped, before glancing at James. "And you?" James cleared his throat, his words caught in a tangle of memories and emotions. "Just water," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual, as Emily jotted down their orders. Her eyes briefly flicked to meet his. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a glimmer of something, resentment, perhaps, or sadness. But she quickly averted her gaze and moved on to the next table. The tension between them lingered long after Emily left. James couldn't shake the image of her silhouette against the soft glow of the restaurant lights. Rachel, unaware of the storm brewing in his mind, continued chatting about vacation plans, the newest art exhibit she wanted to see, and the gala they were scheduled to attend next week. But James barely registered her words. His thoughts were fixed on Emily, on what she might be feeling and the life she had built without him. When Emily returned with their drinks, Rachel leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "You look familiar," she said to Emily, her tone casual. "Have we met before?" Emily froze for a split second, her professional demeanor slipping as her eyes darted toward James. "I don't believe so," she replied evenly. "I just started working here recently." James clenched his fists onto the table, feeling the weight of unspoken words pressing on his chest. As Emily walked away, Rachel narrowed her eyes at him. "What's going on? James? Do you know her?" He hesitated, his mind racing for an answer that wouldn't unravel the evening. "She's someone I used to know," he said finally, his voice laced with regret. Rachel's brow furrowed. but she let the topic drop. For now, the rest of the dinner was a blur for James. Each glance across the room brought him back to Emily, her quiet strength and the life she was now living. Questions gnawed at him. Who was the father of her child? Was she happy? And why did the sight of her now, after all these years, feel like a second chance he hadn't asked for but desperately needed? When the evening ended, James walked Rachel to her building, her words barely registering in his ears. As she leaned in for a kiss, he hesitated, the weight of his thoughts pulling him back. "Rain check," he said softly. "I've got work to finish." Rachel's disappointment was clear, but she nodded and disappeared into the building. Back in his car, James stared out at the city lights, their brilliance muted against the storm of emotions swirling inside him. Emily's presence had cracked the foundation of his carefully curated life, and he wasn't sure whether to rebuild it or let it crumble. As the car pulled up to his penthouse, he leaned back in his seat, one thought echoing louder than the rest. He had to see her again, not for closure, but for something far deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. The city buzzed with its usual energy the following morning. But for James Parker, the world felt oddly quiet. He sat in his penthouse, a steaming cup of coffee growing cold on the sleek glass table before him. The usual satisfaction he found in his meticulously planned mornings was absent, replaced by the gnawing weight of the previous night. Emily's face, her calm demeanor masking something deeper, lingered in his mind. And then there was the pregnancy, a stark reminder of the life she was now building without him. James had built his world on ambition and success, a fortress of wealth and prestige meant to shield him from doubt and regret. Yet now, cracks were forming, and the memories he had long buried began to seep through. The divorce had been inevitable, or so he had convinced himself. He and Emily had wanted different things. He had told anyone who asked. He had needed to focus on his career, to climb higher, while she had yearned for stability, connection, and a family. But the truth was murkier. Emily had been his anchor during his rise, her quiet strength and unwavering support a steady presence in the chaos. And when she had asked for more time, more attention, more of him, he hadn't known how to give it. James closed his eyes, remembering the night she left. Her suitcase had been small, as if she were testing his resolve, and her voice had been steady, though her eyes brimmed with tears. "I can't keep living like this," she had said. "I love you, but I can't love this version of us." He had let her go, believing it was the right decision for both of them. Yet now, seeing her again, visibly pregnant and working late nights, he felt the sting of his failure. He hadn't just let her go, he had let her down. Unable to focus on work, James reached for his phone. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the contact list. He hadn't spoken to Lila, a mutual friend who had stayed close to Emily, in years. When he finally called, her voice carried a mix of surprise and caution. "James Parker," she said. "This is unexpected." "Lila," James began, his voice strained. I ran into Emily last night." The line was quiet for a moment before she replied. "I figured you would. Eventually. She's been working at Silverwood for a while." "She's pregnant," he said, the words catching in his throat. "Is she okay?" Lila sighed, her tone softening. "She's fine, James. She's strong. But things haven't been easy." She started her own interior design business after the divorce. It was going well for a while, but the market turned, and she's been struggling to keep it afloat. "The restaurant job is just to make ends meet." "And the baby?" he asked. "Quieter now. The father isn't in the picture." Lila said, "It wasn't a serious relationship. She's planning to raise the baby on her own." The words hit James harder than he expected. He pictured Emily navigating her pregnancy alone, balancing work and bills with the grace she always carried. A wave of guilt washed over him, mingled with something he hadn't felt in years, a fierce desire to help. "Why didn't she ever say anything?" James asked, more to himself than to Lila. "You know Emily," Lila replied. "She's proud. She wouldn't ask for help, especially not from you." The conversation ended soon after, but Lila's words stayed with him. Emily's pride had always been part of what he admired about her. She had wanted a partnership built on mutual respect, not charity. And yet, James couldn't shake the feeling that he had an obligation, not as her ex-husband, but as someone who had once promised to care for her. That evening, James found himself back at Silverwood. The glowing sign and soft hum of conversation inside felt both familiar and alien. He had told himself he was there for closure, but deep down, he knew it was something more. He spotted Emily almost immediately. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her black uniform blending into the understated elegance of the room. When she finally approached his table, her expression was guarded, her professional mask firmly in place. "James," she said evenly, her voice devoid of the warmth he once knew. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Please." Emily hesitated, glancing around the room. "I'm working." "I know," he said quickly. "I just need a few minutes." Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Fine. Make it quick." James leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've heard about the business. The baby, everything. Emily, I need to know, are you okay?" She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "Why do you care?" "James, it's been years. You've moved on, and so have I." "Because I never stopped caring," he said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I know I let you down. I know I can't change the past. But if there's anything I can do now, anything at all, I want to help." Emily stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Help," she echoed, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "You think you can just swoop in and fix everything?" "I don't think that," he said, his tone steady. I don't want you to do this alone." Her eyes softened for a moment, but she quickly caught herself. "I've been managing just fine without you." "James!" "I know you have," he said gently, "but you don't have to." Emily's gaze flicked to the kitchen, where her manager stood watching. She exhaled sharply. "Fine. Meet me out back when my shift ends." The alley behind the restaurant was quiet, the sounds of the city muted by the late hour. Emily leaned against the brick wall, her arms crossed. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and in the soft glow of the streetlights, James saw the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Talk," she said simply. James took a deep breath. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I want to be here for you, for the baby, even if it's just as a friend." Emily studied him for a long moment, her expression a mix of skepticism and something softer. Finally, she nodded. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. For James, that was enough. For now. The weeks following James's late-night conversation with Emily passed in a whirlwind of reflection and cautious action. He didn't dive in head first, knowing that Emily's trust would have to be earned step by step. But he also didn't retreat. Instead, he found quiet ways to offer support, all while keeping his intentions clear. He wasn't trying to reclaim the past, but rather to help her build the future she deserved. Emily, ever independent, was hesitant at first. She viewed James's gestures with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. But gradually, the barriers between them began to crack. The first real shift came when James reached out to a few trusted contacts in the interior design world. Without telling Emily, he spoke to business owners who could benefit from her talents, dropping her name and vouching for her creativity and skill. Within days, Emily began receiving calls for consultations. At first, she was confused, then cautiously optimistic. She was too proud to question the serendipity. But James could see the change in her demeanor when they met for coffee one afternoon. "Things are picking up," Emily admitted, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. She didn't meet his eyes, but there was a flicker of hope in her voice. "I've gotten a few inquiries this week. Good ones." James nodded, his tone casual. "That's great to hear. You deserve it." Emily glanced at him sharply, as though trying to gauge his sincerity. She had always been able to see through him, and this time, she seemed satisfied. "Thank you," she said softly. It was the first unguarded moment between them since their reconnection, and James felt a tentative warmth bloom in his chest. As her business picked up, Emily began to find her footing again. Her days were still long, balancing shifts at the restaurant with client meetings. But there was a new energy about her, The spark James had always admired was returning, and with it, a cautious openness toward him. Their conversations became less stilted, filled instead with shared laughter and occasional reminiscing. It wasn't always easy. Memories of their shared past often hovered like a shadow, but they both seemed committed to moving forward rather than dwelling on what had gone wrong. One evening, as Emily wrapped up a consultation at her new design studio, James stopped by with takeout. The space was small but bursting with her personality, color swatches pinned to the walls, sample boards neatly stacked in one corner, and a faint scent of fresh paint in the air. "You didn't have to do that," she said as he unpacked the food on a makeshift table. "I figured you might need a break." James replied with a shrug. "Plus, I remember how much you used to love pad thai." Emily smiled, her expression softening. "Still do. Thanks." They ate in companionable silence at first, the hum of the city outside providing a soothing backdrop. But as the meal wound down, Emily set her chopsticks aside and looked at James thoughtfully. "You've changed," she said, her tone more curious than accusatory. James met her gaze, his expression serious. "I had to. Losing you was the wake-up call I didn't know I needed." Emily's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I've been thinking about that. About us. About what went wrong." And James prompted gently, his heart thudding in his chest. "I think we both made mistakes," she said, her voice steady. "But I also think we've both grown. I'm not saying we can just go back to how things were, but maybe we can figure out what this is together." James felt a surge of emotion, relief, hope, and something deeper. He nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "I'd like that, more than anything." The months that followed were a journey of rebuilding, not just their relationship, but their individual lives. James took steps to rebalance his priorities, stepping back from the relentless grind of work to focus on things that truly mattered. He began spending more time with Emily, helping her prepare for the baby and supporting her in her business endeavors. They attended birthing classes together, their shared laughter and mutual awe at the process creating new memories that felt like healing balm for old wounds. For Emily, trusting James again wasn't a linear path. There were moments of hesitation, of doubt, but also moments of clarity. She saw the effort he put into being present, not just for her, but for the life they were about to welcome into the world. Slowly, her walls began to come down, and she allowed herself to hope. On a crisp autumn evening, Emily went into labor. The call from the hospital came unexpectedly, and James rushed to her side. When he arrived, he found her pale but calm, her hand gripping the bed rail as she breathed through another contraction. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw no trace of hesitation in her eyes. "You're here," she said, her voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Of course," James replied, taking her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." The hours were long and grueling, but Emily faced the ordeal with a strength that left James in awe. He stayed by her side, whispering words of encouragement and holding her hand through every wave of pain. When their son's first cries filled the room, James felt his world shift. The tiny, wriggling baby placed in Emily's arms was a testament to resilience, love, and second chances. As Emily gazed at their son, tears streaming down her cheeks, she looked up at James. "We did it," she whispered. "No," James said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it. You're incredible." Emily smiled, and in that moment, James felt the last pieces of their fractured bond begin to mend. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and joyful milestones. James was there for all of it: late-night feedings, diaper changes, and quiet moments of wonder as they marveled at their son's tiny hands and curious eyes. He moved into a modest home near Emily's, giving them space while still being present for her and the baby. Their relationship grew slowly but steadily, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to making things work. On a chilly winter morning, as the three of them sat together on Emily's couch, their son nestled between them, James turned to her. "I never thought I'd get a second chance with you," he said, his voice filled with quiet reverence. but I'm grateful every day that I did. Emily reached for his hand, her expression warm. You've earned it, James. And I think we're going to be okay. As their son cooed softly in his sleep, James felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time, his life wasn't defined by ambition or regret. It was defined by love, connection, and the promise of a brighter future, a future they were building together. Thank you for watching today's story on Empathy Stories. We hope James and Emily's journey reminded you of the power of forgiveness, love, and the courage to rebuild. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming narratives. Your support inspires us to bring more meaningful stories to life. See you in the next video.